War shows the level of hardness of people. Sometimes the behavior of the military and civilians becomes such that it is impossible to explain it within the bounds of reason. Many wars have seen mankind in the history of its existence, but one of the largest and most tragic is the Second World War. Supporters of Hitler in front of the world community showed all their terrible qualities, bitterness and hatred for humanity. People were not only exterminated with the help of the most different weapons, but also conducted experiments on them. And concentration camps were not only a place of hard labor conditions, constant work, but also a place for numerous experiments. And the worst thing is that doctors took an active part in these experiments as researchers. Those people who were supposed to protect human lives. But the Nazi doctors turned into bloodthirsty beasts. Concentration camp inmates had to suffer mental and physical horrors. And to this day, these experiments remain dark pages of history. The propaganda ideology of the Third Reich said that people who were not of the Aryan nation were creatures even less valuable than animals, and only Germans are a superhuman race that must be preserved, protected, cared for. And also to create various drugs that would help German soldiers to bear the hardships and difficulties of war more easily. Well, it was impossible to test these drugs on the soldiers of the greatest army in the world. For experiments perfectly suited prisoners of concentration camps, which in principle were not considered human beings. And there was nothing wrong with the terrible tests they were subjected to. But at the same time, when it became clear that the Third Reich was losing the Second World War, the experimenters tried to destroy all documents that would testify to their terrible atrocities. It turns out that they realized they were doing a terrible, cruel, wrong thing. But they kept doing what they were doing anyway. National Socialist Germany treated Russian Poles, Jews, Gypsies, Serbs as a non-Aryan nation, as those who were inferior in biological advantage. These nations were considered weak, of no value, but animals were protected by the Nazis. In 1933, the Third Reich passed the Animal Welfare Act. It was a progressive act of the time that resonated with the top leadership. Adolf Hitler was a vegetarian and was very fond of dogs. The same behavior was seen in Goebbels and Gimmer. All of them tried to refrain from eating meat and were against animal experimentation, except that human meat and all human flesh in general had no value to them. They believed that the progress of civilization came at a price, and in order for medicine to progress, certain sacrifices had to be made. The number of these sacrifices did not matter. It could have been hundreds, thousands, or millions of concentration camp prisoners. They were maimed. Their lives were taken for the sake of medical progress. But this progress was not to go to all mankind, but only to the Aryans. One of the infamous concentration camps is Buchenwald. It is one of the largest concentration camps. It was located near the city of Weimar. It was created in 1937 and ceased to exist in 1945. During its existence, 250,000 prisoners were held in Buchenwald. About 56,000 prisoners died or were destroyed. Both children and adults were held in this camp. They all had to work tirelessly. Not far from the camp was the Maybau factory, which produced parts for shells. The DAV factory made ammunition for the military, and the Gustloff Werke factory supplied weapons. It was always necessary to work. If a person lost his value as a worker, he was destroyed. Barracks number 61 was notorious. All incapacitated people were sent there. Up to 200 people were killed per day. The dead were transported to the crematorium. Burning, as a rule, took place at night. Also, on the territory of the camp there were special blocks where experiments on people were carried out. The subjects did not voluntarily consent to participate in the experiments. Most often they were not even informed about what experiments would be carried out on them. Even if a person survived the experiments, he or she was destroyed because he or she was a living witness to the atrocities committed by the Nazis. One of the experiments was to test the effectiveness of phosphorus burn preparations. But this progress was not to go to all mankind, but only to the Aryans. One of the infamous concentration camps is Buchenwald. It is one of the largest concentration camps. It was located near the city of Weimar. It was created in 1937 and ceased to exist in 1945. During its existence, 250,000 prisoners were held in Buchenwald. About 56,000 prisoners died or were destroyed. Both children and adults were held in this camp. They all had to work tirelessly. The experiments were conducted in Block 46. The subjects were deliberately burned with substances that contained phosphorus. The procedure was very painful. That is, in fact, the prisoners were intentionally burned on some part of the body, and the burn was very severe. After receiving the burn, the subject was treated. They used various drugs, which, according to Nazi doctors, were supposed to help. These medicines were produced at chemical industry enterprises in Germany. But the drugs were not always effective. Some had no effect at all, and some had a negative effect on the burns themselves. People not only did not get cured, but also got even more injuries. As a result of such experiments, prisoners received very serious injuries that stayed with them for the rest of their lives. Often the scars on the body would not heal, and were proof of the terrible ordeal the person had been through. The prisoners essentially became living torches. Later, a drug called R17 was used to treat them. It was applied to fresh wounds. The effect of the drug was similar to that of modern immune stimulants of plant origin. The Second World War showed the cruelty of man. It exposed all his basest, most vicious qualities, and especially those people who, by the nature of their profession, had to fight for life, not destroy it. Nazi doctors violated the Hippocratic Oath. Some of them were later brought before the Nuremberg trials and received the punishment they deserved. After the crimes that were committed by German doctors, the World Organization of Physicians developed a modern version of the oath. Since the Congress was held in Geneva, the document was called the Geneva Declaration. In subsequent years, it was modified, but the essence remained the same. A doctor should fight for the patient's life, not destroy it. About all the horrors of medical experiments conducted by the Nazis today, unfortunately, it will not be possible to learn. Because during the retreat, the Germans tried to destroy as many documents and as many living witnesses of their abuse as possible. But those who survived tried to tell the whole world about what they had experienced. They tried to make sure that their tormentors would not escape punishment. The evidence was their mutilated bodies. It was really important then, and even now, to cover these topics, not to keep them quiet, so that in the future no one would even think of conducting any experiments on people without their voluntary consent, so that no one would have a thought to treat people worse than animals, that all inhabitants of the planet try to develop mercy and compassion in themselves,